Reggie, can you summarize for us Paul's missionary methods and how they developed? And should we base our modern mission strategies on what Paul did?
Oh, let me think about that. That's a good question, Wes. I think of three things that come up in Paul's missionary journeys that are worth thinking about for modern missions. One is something that stays consistent all the way through, and it is that he tries to minister not on his own, but he's always surrounded with a retinue. Even when he breaks up when he goes out for the first missionary journey, it's Saul and Barnabas, and they together are working. But even the two of them, they have a retinue that travels with them. And even when they break up at the beginning of the second missionary journey, and they simply agree that they can't work together, at least for now, Barnabas goes back to Cyprus, but he takes John Mark with him. So that becomes a two-person mission. And Paul picks up Silas and takes him with him into Asia Minor, and along the way picks up Timothy. And all the way through, all the way through, and all during Paul's writing ministry, he's talking about the people that are with him that he's ministering with. So it's ministry in community. That's one important takeaway from Paul's missionary journeys. The second thing is something that changes after the first missionary journey. In the first missionary journey, they simply show up in town. And as long as people, will stand them, they'll talk. But then what happens is as people in the Jewish synagogues get upset with them, they wind up getting kicked out of town. And, Paul even gets left for dead. In the second missionary journey, it looks like there's a change of strategy. And I think it was occasioned by the one place in the first missionary journey where Paul had a benefactor. And it was on the island of Cyprus when he goes before Sergius Paulus and proclaims the gospel. And this governor believes, and Paul is protected. Well, I think Paul does some reflection after the first missionary journey. I think that. That's an opinion the text doesn't really say. He may have thought about some other things too. But one of the things that's noticeable in the second missionary journey that's different is that he winds up getting more hooked into, more rooted, embedded in the communities that he's ministering to. For instance, in Philippi, he winds up accepting the hospitality of Lydia. He winds up accepting hospitality in other cities as well. Also, he takes up his trade, or brings his trade with him, of tent making. So he is not dependent upon people supporting him financially. So he receives the protection of a local host. He works with his hands. And also in the second missionary journey, he appeals to his Roman citizenship when injustice is being done to him. And so he works more carefully, I think, to take advantage of local support, of his own ability to support himself, and then political protection so that the gospel can be proclaimed. So I think there are probably some principles there that we can carry into mission strategy. And then the third thing is yet one more thing that I think stays consistent throughout his ministry, and that's the principle of to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Now, practically what that meant for Paul is when he could, he would find a group of Jews to preach to first, whether it was like Lydia and the women who were meeting at a riverside on a Sabbath morning, or whether there was a synagogue to go to. He would go and he would preach Jesus to Jews, because Jesus doesn't mean anything except as the Jewish Messiah. And it's that larger story of redemptive history that makes Jesus make sense. The one place where Paul doesn't have a chance to do that is in Lystra. where he goes, he and Barnabas, they go into the city and they do a miracle. And these pagans, they just interpret it for what their own religious background suggests, and that they think that Zeus and Mercury have shown up again. They were supposed to have shown up centuries ago. People missed it, and they were all upset. And now these two people come and they do these magnificent miracles, and they think the pagan gods are among them, so they start to do a sacrifice to them. They have no point of reference to understand what the message is that Paul has come to tell them and what the miracle means that they have done. So the carry away for us from this is the story that Jesus is the center of is what makes Jesus make sense. Like in the modern missionary world, there are missions organizations that I think have learned well from Paul's strategy. They'll come into a village, and instead of just going right to the punchline, Jesus, they'll start to tell the whole biblical narrative of creation and fall and God's call of Abraham and his making of a nation through Moses, and then his raising up King David and the divided monarchy and the prophets, and then Jesus as the one through whom that whole story gets fulfillment. And so when they get to Jesus, he makes sense because of the larger biblical drama that he fulfills, instead of just being, this random name that folks can just plug into whatever religious value system that they have. And by the way, I think that means a lot for the way we do ministry, even in areas that we think of as being not missionary, but just, the normal world that most people live in the West. It's so post-Christian that it really is missionary, even if we don't think of it. And people can do signs, they can speak in marvelous tongues, they can, miracles can be done. But if they're not put in the context of the Bible's story of creation, fall, and redemption, they just become one more means to get power. Naked, selfish, ego inflating power. And so I think there's a really deep principle involved in Paul's doing to the Jew first and also to the Gentile. It's go telling about Jesus as the Messiah of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, the Jewish nation.